Hi everyone, I'm Elise and I'm a social researcher at Bryant Research. And today I'm going to be talking about some research that I undertook with the Faunalytics team about the small body problem, and specifically the small body problem in regards to our interventions, our advocacy tactics. So this research is Quantifying the Small Body Problem, a meta-analysis of animal product production interventions. So let's get into it. So, first off, what is the small body problem? We can think of it like this: when people ditch products like beef and pork, we count it as a win, right? But what if they eat more chicken and fish to make up for it? This means more animals have to be farmed and slaughtered, more animals suffer, all because chicken and fish are just literally so much smaller. They're small creatures, right? So you would need nearly 200 chickens to produce the same amount of meat that you could get from a singular cow. It's not to say that we should be eating cows, it's to say that the impact is felt so much more by small bodied animals, just by nature of who they are as individuals. They're small, right? So, this is the small body problem. And the fear is that our diet interventions could actually be triggering it. When we are encouraging people to give up meat and dairy and eggs, when we're encouraging them to reduce consumption of these products, are they actually doing so and switching to plant-based foods, or are they swapping out one animal product for another? Are they maybe ditching red meat but then eating more fish to make up for it? This would compound animal suffering, right? Because now the scale is so much greater because fish are small, chickens are small. Right? Okay, that's the small body problem in a nutshell. So, to study if this was a real problem, that animal advocates were actually unintentionally pushing the small body problem, we undertook a meta-analysis. What's a meta-analysis? A meta-analysis is a study of studies. So the results of many individual studies on the same topic are gathered and combined like a puzzle. Each intervention is going to be a puzzle piece, and then the full picture, of course, the full puzzle is the meta-analysis. So, specifically, we scoured Google Scholar for animal product reduction interventions. When I say reduction interventions, this also includes elimination interventions. So, when people weren't being, when we weren't trying to convince people to reduce, when we were actually trying to convince them to go entirely vegan. So we used some search terms that you can see on the screen, and we took a review of reviews approach. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and collect all of these individual interventions one by one by one by one, we actually just looked at articles that had already done this. We looked at meta-analyses and systematic reviews and other types of review articles that had already gathered a bunch of studies and done their own analyses. So we took those reviews and then we extracted all of the individual interventions that they had taken and we put them through our own filtration process. So we looked to see if the articles were relevant just via their title. Did they seem relevant for our purposes? If so, we then read the abstract, and then if they were still relevant, we read the full text. If you want to know what the exact eligibility criteria were for our study, it's in the next slide, so just hold tight. And then for every individual intervention, we extracted certain information. So quantitatively, we're extracting things like means, mean differences, sample sizes, standard deviations. And then these were used to calculate standardized mean differences, or SMDs, and variance estimates. It's okay if you don't really know what these are. This is truly just the language of meta-analyses. You need all of these different studies to speak the same language so that you can compare them together. So yeah, that's what we did. Quantitatively, qualitatively, we were taking intervention characteristics, outcome characteristics. So for instance, was an intervention using an animal rights appeal? Were they using an environmental appeal? What about a health appeal? That would all be relevant to know if one kind of appeal is triggering people to consume more small animals or not. We're looking at if people were implementing graphic imagery in their interventions or not. Who's the source of this information? Was this an animal rights organization? Was this an academic? Was this a health professional? Just all sorts of things. The list goes on and on and on. I won't bore you with all of it. And then we're also looking at outcome characteristics. So, how soon after the intervention were people's diet behaviors measured? Was this something that we measured right after giving the intervention, or were we looking 6 months down the line? And then were we looking at people's intentions of what they were going to eat versus their self-reported diet versus the diet that we actually observed them, taking. These were all outcome characteristics that we were interested in. So after gathering all this information, we ran 4 different meta-analyses. I know we keep talking about we did a meta-analysis. No, we did 4. So first, we were looking at people's large animal consumption. So what happened to their consumption of beef and pork, etc., after they were exposed to an animal product reduction intervention. And then the real bread and butter is how are people responding with their small animal product consumption? Were they, increasing their consumption of small animals? Were they decreasing their consumption of small animals? Was it staying stagnant? This is really what we're interested, right? So because we were so interested in it, we actually broke it down into 2 smaller pieces. We looked at people's bird consumption, so that includes like chicken, egg, turkey, etc., and then their fish consumption, which included like fish and shellfish as well, like other crustaceans. Okay, so what studies were we actually interested in? Which ones were we measuring? I'm not going to go through all of these because it's a bit of a long list and I don't want to fatigue you guys too much. So I'll just pull out some important bits. The intervention row you can look at first. So we were interested in any assigned intervention that was intending to reduce animal product consumption. So if a study was like, they were looking at people that had already pledged to go vegan and we were just going to track what happened to their diet behaviors, over the course of time, that was of no interest to us, right? Because we want people to be placed in an intervention, not just see what people do just by their own free will, really. Another thing we were looking at was a true control group, or at least a baseline time period where people weren't exposed to any sort of intervention. Because if you don't have, a good comparison group, a truly neutral comparison group, it throws your results into question. And we were interested in the outcome. So this one was actually quite broad. We could look at people's actual consumption, their self-reported consumption, their intended consumption even. Intentions don't always line up with actual behavior, so we ran some extra stats for the intention studies, but we collected them all the same, right? And we weren't just actually interested in people's actual consumption. We were interested in their selection of products, in their purchase of products even. And here's the real kicker. We were only able to include studies that separated out animal products. So what does that mean? So if a study aggregated all like meat consumption or all animal product consumption, there was nothing we could do with that research, right? Because how are we going to know if small-bodied animal consumption went up or large-bodied animal consumption went down if everything was just meat, right? There's no way for us to extract the specific consumption behaviors there because everything is just one flat category. So yeah, we had to exclude studies that aggregated all meat into one or all animal products into one. And yeah, the rest of the details there, you can pause and read through them, or actually look on the Faunalytics site where it goes into even greater detail. So moving on, what did we actually find? So when we did our meta-analysis of large animals, this included 33 different articles and 78 interventions were housed within those articles. We found a slight decrease in people's consumption of these products after being exposed to an animal product reduction intervention, which, was fantastic, but it was a non-significant decrease. So this just means that statistically, we're not super confident that this decrease had anything to do with the interventions themselves, or this was just due to random chance. Because sometimes things just happen out in the world and it doesn't have anything to do with what you put forth in the matter of an intervention. It's just because things happen. And so statistically, we're actually not that confident that this slight decrease in animal product consumption, in large animal product consumption, was actually due to the interventions. It could have just been due to chance out in the world, to the randomness in the world. Then we looked at small animals. This was, of course, our key meta-analysis. This was 25 articles in total with 64 interventions housed within those articles. And just like with large animals, we found a non-significant decrease. Then we broke it down even further. We separated out fish and we separated out birds, and we're seeing the same story, right? Slight decrease in consumption of these products and a non-significant one. So the good news is that we found no evidence of the small body problem, right? Our worry was that we're going to see an increase in small-bodied animal consumption. We didn't find that. If anything, we found a decrease, a non-statistically significant one, but a clue that maybe the needle is being pushed in the right direction, right? So we found no evidence of the small body problem. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. Our activism isn't unintentionally causing more harm, right? We're not compounding animal suffering. Fantastic. But this comes actually with a couple major caveats that I have to get into. So firstly, there was high variability, extremely high variability between interventions. We were trying to compare interventions that used leafleting. We were trying to compare that with interventions that were, a university course or university lecture. We're comparing that with people that were, in a health intervention, people that were trying to, cut down on their red meat consumption for the sake of their heart health. Like, there's just very different interventions at play here. And when you're trying to compare them against each other, you're really comparing apples and oranges. These were not very similar studies. And so to make a conclusion based off all of these really different studies is just, it's just a bit tricky. It's a bit sticky, to be honest. And there's also relatively small samples. I know in the previous slide, I was saying there's 78 interventions here. There's 64 interventions. These are pretty big numbers. You would think you can get some really robust answers out of such a wide spread of studies. But this actually comes down to the issue of the high variability. Once again, is that we only had, a few studies that used a video intervention versus a text intervention, a few studies that were from animal rights groups versus health professionals versus academics, just a few studies that used graphic imagery versus not. There's only a couple drops in each of these buckets. So to make strong conclusions about what types of interventions are causing the small body problem versus aren't, it's just quite difficult. You need a lot more research. You need these buckets to be full. Maybe not full, but you need more than a couple drops to make sweeping conclusions. So that's all to say, it's difficult to make sweeping conclusions. Some interventions do lead to increased small-bodied animal consumption. So we need to be super mindful of these so that we can avoid them, right? And we want to emulate the ones that are doing the most good. But as I went over earlier, it's mostly inconclusive. Like, which intervention should we emulate? I would love to tell you, but we mostly don't know. Should you be using graphic content? Should you be using a health appeal versus an environmental appeal? Should you be telling people to go vegan versus telling people to reduce? I can't really tell you quite yet. We need more research to be able to make firm conclusions. However, there is a little clue here. Choice architecture looks actually pretty promising. Choice architecture is, I would ideally like to see a bit more research on it first before I make a really strong stand, but the stats for choice architecture were the most robust out of everything. So I'm much more confident encouraging people to implement choice architecture wherever they can. I certainly didn't see a backfire effect. I don't know how effective it'll be in reducing, because sometimes it does, more than others, but it's certainly not leading to a backfire effect. People aren't consuming more animal products, so it seems quite safe, and more than safe, it does look like it's pushing the needle in the right direction in most scenarios. So yeah, use choice architecture wherever you can. As far as which interventions we should be avoiding, this is even more inconclusive. Super regrettably, I can't give you any strong information here. We just need more data, but we have a plan on how to get that data. So this is a research roadmap for studying the small body problem. You can pause if you want to go into detail, but I'll just give a quick overview. As far as what you're going to need to measure, you want to measure a variety of animal products, right? So don't aggregate meat, don't aggregate animal products into one category. You need to separate these out. So measure both large animals and small animals. Measure things that aren't just meat. Measure people's cheese consumption, measure people's egg consumption, dairy. Try to get a really wide spread of animal products. And of course, you're going to want to measure both the control group, so who wasn't exposed to any intervention, and also the treatment or treatments group if you have multiple interventions you're doing at the same time. As far as how you're going to measure it, you can use A few different methods, really. One thing you could do is a food frequency questionnaire. Faunalytics has a resource on this. Actually, you can just like copy and paste what they recommend. So, a food frequency questionnaire is going to give you self-report, right? What people say they're eating or have eaten. Um, Ideally, you're going to measure people's actual consumption directly. So if you're partnering with like a university canteen or something, you can see what people have actually purchased, have actually redeemed, um, or eaten directly. If you have the ability to measure like food waste or something on people's plates, you can actually measure how much they're eating. So yeah, that's ideally what you can do, but a lot of the time you aren't able to look at people's direct consumption. So, the best alternative I would say is a food frequency questionnaire. What you don't want to do is measure intentions. Intentions just aren't very representative of what people actually do. So avoid that. Don't even bother with what people intend to do. As far as when to measure, of course, it's helpful to know if there was an immediate impact, if people immediately changed their food behavior. But ideally, you're going to measure more long term. So don't just measure what people immediately did. Track it over time. See if after 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, heck, go as far as a year. See if there's any longevity to people's consumption behaviors. What you're going to want to report is your standard stats that you were going to do anyway. You're probably going to run inferential statistics to see if there was a statistically significant change in people's eating behaviors. So whether that's going to be a t-test, a chi-squared, an ANOVA, just whatever your design needs, you're going to run that all the same. But you need some extra information in order to be included in a meta-analysis. So the next time I run a meta-analysis, I want to be able to include your study, and I can only do that if specific information is in my hands. So make sure you are reporting the average or mean values for animal product consumption for each condition. So the control condition, the intervention condition, maybe you have multiple intervention conditions, report the mean value for each of them. And then you want to report the standard deviation of each of those mean values, right? It's the same thing per condition. And then also the sample sizes. So how many people were in the control condition, how many people were in intervention X, intervention Y, report it all, right? And then the final step, a little bonus here, would be to add it to the LIME database. LIME is the library of interventions for meat elimination. It's a fantastic resource. As the name more than suggests, as the name blatantly says, it is a library of interventions. So you're going to see a bunch of different interventions that have, been done with the aim of reducing people's animal product consumption or entirely eliminating their animal product consumption. And Lyme gives these like in-depth details about each study. So kind of like what we did when we're pulling out details about what kind of intervention was this? How long was the intervention? Who was giving the intervention? Lyme has done this as well. And so if you add your study to the database or request that they add your study to the database if they haven't already, you can then run some really cool stuff. You can run meta-analyses right in the platform. So you don't need someone like me that's going to go and take a couple months to do this. You could do it. Right now, they don't have, last I checked, they don't have the capability to do this type of meta-analysis where you're looking at specific species. Last I checked, they just had like meat as an aggregate thing to see how meat consumption changes or how animal product consumption changes. They might have dairy, actually, now that I think about it. But if you want to look at, individual species, that's something that hopefully they're going to add to the database soon. But no guarantees, just fingers crossed. It's in beta right now, so they're adding stuff all the time. So yeah, after throwing all of that at you, what do I actually recommend? So one thing I would recommend is to implement choice architecture wherever possible. I know not every design is going to allow that, but where it does, do it. I think it could really have a strong impact, and it won't backfire on the animals. It won't lead people to consume more chicken, more fish, more of the small creatures. And then conduct more research. Refer to the research roadmap that I just went through, that I said I was going to go over briefly, and then I gabbed on for like 5 minutes about it. Conduct more research, right? We need more research, so do it. And then use our accompanying resources and those from other organizations. So for example, we're recommending consulting Lyme, looking at this library of interventions for meat elimination. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to start from scratch. There are resources, there are tools. So you have a lot in your hands. I really, really encourage you to use them. So without further ado, we'll move into some questions and answers. First one, there are so many animal product reduction studies. How is it possible that we still don't have enough data? Mostly, this is because, well, not mostly, but in large part, this is because so many animal product reduction studies have aggregated animal products. So they measure just all meat, they measure all animal products. We cannot study the small body problem if we cannot separate out the different types of animals that are being consumed or the products that are being consumed. So yeah, there's a lot of studies out there. There's hundreds of studies out there, but they're just not apt for this type of analysis. So that's why we need to be conducting more research, separating out all of these species so that we can actually see if the small body problem is something we ought to be concerned about, and then how to avoid it, and how to maximize our impact. So yeah, there's so much research out there, and unfortunately, we just can't use all of it for this type of research. Next questions. After an intervention, animal product consumption doesn't rise, but it also doesn't decrease, at least not statistically significantly decrease. So should we be worried about the effectiveness of our tactics, just like overall as a movement? Should we be worried about this? Ideally, you're going to see animal product consumption not just stay stagnant, but we're going to want to see a really strong dip, right? We're going to want to see consumption going way down, statistically significantly, meaningfully down, and that's not what we found. So should we be worried about this? In some ways, yes, which I think is just kind of a healthy mindset to have overall, that, when you are a movement that has so few resources, that has so little money, yeah, we should be worried about the effectiveness of what we're doing so that we're, maximizing our impact with very little resources, that we're not wasting resources on something that's ineffective. Yes, we should be worried about these things kind of just as a baseline mindset. But more specifically, when it comes to this type of research, it's not that all interventions were just blah, like all interventions were flat, there was no impact. It's that the interventions that cause people to reduce animal product consumption and the intervention that cause people to increase their animal product consumption, these canceled one another out, right? Flattened out. So there's some interventions that are great, that really are reducing people's consumption, and we should be emulating those. I wish I could tell you more details about which interventions those are apart from choice architecture. But again, we need more data to know for sure. But this is to say some interventions are doing good. They are working. And so that I hope people don't come away thinking like, we've done nothing, we've accomplished nothing, there's no progress. I really don't want that to be the takeaway. Some of the stuff we're doing really is making a difference. It's just that other stuff that we've done, not so much. And so we should be worried about those things that are like either just not really serving the movement or actually doing harm. We should be worried about that. So I think there is a place for innovation here. Maybe the next big intervention is something that we've never tried before. Maybe the most impactful thing is something we have never done before. So if you have, a creative, innovative idea, really encourage you to pursue it, to see if it could have more impact than what we're currently doing. And moving on to the last question, you recommend choice architecture, but what does that actually look like? Like, what is choice architecture? Choice architecture is varied. And it's kind of a broad category, actually. But essentially what it is manipulating the environment, manipulating like the built environment to make choosing plant-based foods easier. And in our case, plant-based foods. Choice architecture applies to a whole bunch of contexts. But for our context, plant-based foods. You want to manipulate the environment to where, choosing the plant-based food is the easiest choice, perhaps even the mindless choice, the default choice. There's many different ways to do this. One of them is through plant-based defaults. So if you are eating, the food that's served at a hospital or at a school cafeteria or at even a restaurant, like if the plant-based option is the default, that's the easiest option, right? You can choose to swap out the plant-based option for a meat-based meal. You can choose to like add chicken for an extra fee. You can choose to do this, that, and the other. The personal choice is still there. We're not taking away people's free will. But the plant-based option is certainly the easiest one. It's certainly the most natural one because you don't have to think at all. It's there. So plant-based options are really, really strong option here. Another thing you can do is like at a supermarket, for instance, if you have the plant-based like meat substitutes paired with meat products. If you have like a beef burger and right next to it on the same shelf, you have the plant-based burger. That facilitates easier choice, right, for plant-based foods because you're not requiring people to go down a whole nother aisle of the supermarket that perhaps they were never going to go down anyway. So just, placing it in front of people's faces, making it easier to make that choice, making it more natural and ideally more mindless to make that choice. There's a fair number of other examples of choice architecture out there, but that's kind of the gist, just manipulating the built environment to where you're not taking away people's personal choice whatsoever. So there's really no backfire, but yeah, you're just making it easier for them. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. My name again is Elise, and I'm with Bryant Research. My contact information is there. You're welcome to reach out to me, but also Faunalytics would love to hear from you. If you're planning your next study, you can go to their office hours. They just this is their thing, right? Assisting with research, conducting research for the movement. So you can reach out to them, attend their office hours for sure, and you can find the study actually housed on the Faunalytics site. So check them out.